In the shadows of Renaissance Florence, where power shifted like sand beneath ambitious feet and fortunes rose and fell with the turning of seasons, Niccolò Machiavelli observed a fundamental truth about human nature that would echo through centuries: those who need nothing possess everything, while those who cling to their dependencies become slaves to their own weaknesses. This principle, woven into the fabric of his political philosophy, extends far beyond the corridors of power into the very essence of what it means to live as a truly autonomous being. The concept of needing nothing does not advocate for material poverty or emotional emptiness, but rather speaks to a deeper psychological independence, a state of being where one's sense of self, purpose, and direction emanates from within rather than depending on external validation, circumstances, or the approval of others. It is the difference between the oak tree that bends with the storm but never breaks, and the brittle branch that snaps under the first strong wind because it has grown too dependent on the shelter of other trees. To understand this principle fully, we must first examine what it means to need nothing in a world that constantly tells us we need everything. Modern society perpetuates a culture of dependency, convincing individuals that their worth, happiness, and success are contingent upon external factors: the approval of peers, the accumulation of material possessions, the achievement of certain social markers, or the maintenance of specific relationships. These dependencies, while often disguised as normal human desires, become chains that bind us to patterns of behavior that ultimately diminish our power and autonomy. The truly unstoppable individual recognizes that every dependency is a potential point of vulnerability. When we need the approval of others to feel good about ourselves, we give those others power over our emotional state. When we need specific material conditions to be happy, we become hostages to circumstances beyond our control. When we need certain relationships to maintain our identity, we compromise our authenticity to preserve those connections. Each of these needs becomes a lever that the world can use to manipulate, control, or destroy us. But what does it mean to destroy one's weak self? This is not an act of self-hatred or self-destruction, but rather a conscious dismantling of the aspects of our personality that keep us dependent, reactive, and vulnerable. It is the cultivation of what the Stoics called preferred indifference, the ability to appreciate good things when they come while being equally prepared to lose them without losing ourselves in the process. The weak self is characterized by several key vulnerabilities. It seeks constant validation from others, measuring its worth by external metrics rather than internal standards. It fears loss more than it values growth, leading to stagnation and mediocrity. It reacts emotionally to circumstances rather than responding thoughtfully, allowing external events to dictate internal states. It compromises its values and principles in exchange for temporary comfort or approval. Most importantly, the weak self believes that its survival and happiness depend on controlling outcomes and people rather than controlling itself. The process of destroying this weak self begins with honest self-examination. One must identify the specific ways in which dependency manifests in their life. Do you check social media compulsively, seeking validation through likes and comments? Do you find yourself altering your opinions in social situations to gain acceptance? Do you stay in relationships or situations that no longer serve you because you fear being alone or starting over? Do you postpone important decisions because you're waiting for perfect conditions or certainty? Each of these patterns represents a thread in the web of dependency that must be carefully identified and systematically severed. The destruction of weakness is not a violent or sudden process, but rather a gradual strengthening of the authentic self while simultaneously weakening the hold of external dependencies. It requires developing what might be called strategic indifference, not the cold indifference of someone who doesn't care about anything, but the warm indifference of someone who cares deeply about the right things while remaining unattached to outcomes beyond their control. This strategic indifference manifests in several key areas. In relationships, it means loving others deeply while not needing them to behave in specific ways to maintain your emotional equilibrium. You can appreciate their presence while being equally prepared for their absence. In career and material success, it means working diligently toward your goals while not tying your self-worth to specific achievements or external recognition. You pursue excellence for its own sake rather than for the validation it might bring. In social situations, strategic indifference means expressing your authentic thoughts and opinions regardless of whether they're popular or accepted. You speak your truth not because you need others to agree with you, but because authenticity is more valuable than approval. You make decisions based on your values and judgment rather than on what others expect or what will make you look good. Perhaps most importantly, strategic indifference extends to your own emotional states and circumstances. You learn to observe your emotions without being controlled by them, to experience both success and failure without having your identity depend on either. You develop what the Buddhists call equanimity, a balanced state of mind that remains stable regardless of external conditions. The historical record provides us with numerous examples of individuals who embodied this principle of needing nothing, and their stories illuminate the practical applications of this mindset. Consider Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who possessed ultimate worldly power yet wrote in his personal journal, "Remember that very little disturbs the inner calm except our own thoughts." Despite having access to every luxury and convenience his empire could provide, Aurelius understood that true strength came from his ability to remain centered regardless of external circumstances. His writings reveal a man who had systematically destroyed his weak self through constant self-examination and philosophical practice. He didn't need the empire to validate his worth, he saw his role as emperor as a duty to be performed rather than a source of identity. He didn't need the approval of his subjects or the loyalty of his armies to feel secure, he derived his security from his alignment with virtue and reason. Most remarkably, he didn't even need to remain alive, writing frequently about death not as something to be feared but as a natural transition that could come at any moment without diminishing the value of a life well lived. This philosophical approach to power made Aurelius virtually unconquerable. His enemies could threaten his empire, his allies could betray him, his body could weaken with age and illness, but none of these external changes could touch the core of his being. Because he needed nothing from the world had no leverage over him. He was, in the truest sense, unstoppable, not because he always got what he wanted, but because he had transcended the very need to want. In more recent history, we find similar examples in figures like Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison yet emerged not broken but strengthened. Mandela's power came not from his position or possessions, which had been stripped away, but from his refusal to let external circumstances determine his internal reality. He had destroyed the part of himself that needed freedom, comfort, or recognition to maintain dignity and purpose. This inner independence ultimately made him more powerful than his captors, because while they could control his body, they could not control his spirit. The business world offers its own examples of this principle in action. Consider entrepreneurs who have lost everything multiple times yet continue to rebuild, not because they're addicted to risk but because their sense of self-worth doesn't depend on any particular venture's success. They've learned to hold their plans lightly, to pivot when necessary, and to view failures as information rather than verdicts on their character. This emotional flexibility often makes them formidable competitors because they can make rational decisions without being clouded by ego or attachment to specific outcomes. These individuals share certain characteristics that distinguish them from those who remain trapped in dependency. They have developed what might be called anti-fragility, the ability not just to survive disruption but to grow stronger because of it. They understand that struggle and adversity are not obstacles to be avoided but opportunities to strengthen their independence and resilience. They also possess a clear sense of their own values and principles, which serve as an internal compass that doesn't depend on external validation or changing circumstances. They know what they stand for and why, and this knowledge gives them a foundation that cannot be shaken by criticism, setbacks, or changing social trends. Their identity is built on character rather than circumstance, on who they are rather than what they have or what others think of them. Perhaps most importantly, they have learned to find meaning and satisfaction in the process rather than the outcome, in the journey rather than the destination. They understand that happiness and fulfillment cannot be achieved by reaching some future state but must be found in the present moment through engagement with meaningful activity. This shift in perspective eliminates much of the anxiety and frustration that comes from trying to control results while focusing their energy on what they can actually influence, their own thoughts, choices, and actions. The cultivation of this mindset requires daily practice and constant vigilance. It's easy to slip back into patterns of dependency, especially when faced with stress, uncertainty, or significant life changes. The key is to develop systems and habits that reinforce independence while gradually reducing reliance on external sources of validation and security. One of the most powerful practices is regular solitude, time spent alone with your own thoughts without the distraction of entertainment, social interaction, or external stimulation. This practice builds comfort with your own company and reduces the need for constant external input to feel engaged and alive. Many people discover that they've been running from themselves, filling every moment with noise and activity to avoid confronting their own thoughts and feelings. Learning to sit quietly with yourself, to observe your internal experience without judgment, and to find contentment in your own presence is a fundamental step toward independence. Another crucial practice is the deliberate cultivation of discomfort through voluntary challenges and controlled hardships. This might involve physical challenges like cold exposure, fasting, or intense exercise, but it can also include psychological challenges like public speaking, having difficult conversations, or putting yourself in unfamiliar social situations. The goal is not to suffer for its own sake but to expand your comfort zone and prove to yourself that you can handle difficulty without being destroyed by it. Financial independence, while not strictly necessary for psychological independence, can be a powerful tool for reducing dependency. This doesn't necessarily mean accumulating vast wealth, but rather developing the ability to live well within your means and building sufficient reserves to weather unexpected challenges without having to compromise your values or accept unacceptable conditions. When you know you can walk away from any situation without facing destitution, you gain tremendous power in all your relationships and negotiations. The practical applications of this mindset extend into every area of life, transforming how we approach relationships, career decisions, financial planning, and personal development. In relationships, the person who needs nothing becomes paradoxically more attractive and valuable as a partner, friend, or colleague because they bring their whole self to interactions without the desperate energy of neediness or the manipulative behavior that often accompanies hidden agendas. When you don't need others to behave in specific ways to maintain your emotional equilibrium, you can love them more freely and authentically. You can express appreciation without it being tainted by expectation, offer support without keeping score, and engage in conflict without the fear that disagreement will destroy the relationship. This freedom actually strengthens relationships because it removes the pressure and allows others to be themselves rather than feeling obligated to fulfill your emotional needs. In romantic relationships specifically, this principle revolutionizes the entire dynamic. Instead of seeking a partner to complete you or fill some void in your life, you approach partnership as two complete individuals choosing to share their journey. You can appreciate your partner's presence while being equally prepared to thrive if the relationship ends. This doesn't mean you're indifferent to the relationship or prepared to abandon it at the first sign of difficulty, but rather that your fundamental well-being doesn't depend on your partner's behavior or the relationship's continuation. This approach actually makes relationships more stable and satisfying because it eliminates much of the jealousy, possessiveness, and controlling behavior that destroys partnerships. When you don't need your partner to validate your worth or provide your happiness, you can support their individual growth even when it creates uncertainty or temporary distance. You can have difficult conversations without the fear that honesty will end the relationship because you know you would survive and eventually thrive even if it did. In professional contexts, the individual who needs nothing possesses tremendous negotiating power because they can walk away from any situation that doesn't align with their values or serve their long-term interests. They can take calculated risks without being paralyzed by the fear of failure because their identity and security don't depend on any particular outcome. They can speak truth to power without fear of retaliation because they don't need approval or job security more than they need integrity. This psychological independence often leads to better career outcomes because it allows for clearer thinking and more strategic decision-making. When you're not driven by desperation or limited by fear, you can evaluate opportunities more objectively and make choices based on their actual merit rather than their perceived safety. You can invest in long-term skill development rather than chasing short-term security, take on challenging assignments that others avoid, and build a reputation based on competence and reliability rather than politics and people-pleasing. The entrepreneurial applications are particularly powerful. Many potentially successful businesses never get started because their would-be founders need certainty before taking action. They need to know the outcome before beginning, need sufficient capital to guarantee success, need perfect market conditions before launching. The entrepreneur who needs nothing can start with minimal resources, adapt quickly to changing conditions, and persist through inevitable setbacks because their sense of self-worth isn't tied to any particular venture's success. In financial matters, needing nothing provides protection against both poverty and wealth. Those who have destroyed their weak self can live simply when necessary without feeling deprived, and can handle abundance without becoming corrupted by it. They understand that money is a tool rather than a goal, useful for providing security and options but not capable of providing meaning or happiness. This perspective often leads to better financial decisions because it eliminates the emotional decision-making that causes so many people to live beyond their means or make investment choices based on fear and greed rather than rational analysis. The social applications are equally transformative. In a world increasingly divided by political tribalism and social pressure to conform to group expectations, the individual who needs nothing can navigate social situations with authenticity and grace. They can express unpopular opinions without becoming defensive, listen to opposing viewpoints without feeling threatened, and maintain friendships across ideological divides because their sense of identity doesn't depend on being right or being accepted by any particular group. This social independence becomes particularly valuable in an age of social media and constant connectivity, where many people have become addicted to external validation in the form of likes, comments, and shares. The person who has destroyed their weak self can use these tools without being controlled by them, can engage with others online without needing their approval, and can disconnect when necessary without feeling anxious about missing out or being forgotten. Perhaps most importantly, this mindset provides resilience in the face of major life challenges such as illness, loss of loved ones, career setbacks, or economic hardship. When your fundamental sense of self doesn't depend on external circumstances, you can adapt to changing conditions without losing your essential identity. You can grieve losses without being destroyed by them, face uncertainty without being paralyzed by it, and emerge from difficulties stronger rather than merely scarred. The cultivation of this mindset is not about becoming cold, indifferent, or disconnected from life, but rather about engaging more fully from a position of strength rather than weakness. It's about loving without attachment, striving without desperation, and living without the constant fear that life might not meet your expectations. It's about understanding that true security comes not from controlling outcomes but from trusting in your ability to handle whatever outcomes arise. This transformation requires patience and persistence because it goes against many of the messages we receive from culture, media, and even well-meaning friends and family. We live in a society that profits from our dependencies, that sells us products and services by convincing us that we need them to be happy, successful, or worthy. Breaking free from these conditioned patterns of thinking requires conscious effort and often feels uncomfortable or even lonely at first. But the rewards of this transformation extend far beyond personal benefit. When you no longer need validation, approval, or control from others, you become capable of giving these things more freely. When you're not constantly worried about your own security and status, you can focus on contributing value to others and working toward goals larger than yourself. When you're not driven by fear and desperation, you can make decisions based on wisdom and compassion rather than self-protection and immediate gratification. The truly unstoppable individual, paradoxically, often appears quite ordinary on the surface. They don't need to project an image of strength or independence because these qualities emerge naturally from their inner state. They don't need to prove their power because they're secure in it. They don't need to win every argument or dominate every situation because their sense of worth doesn't depend on such victories. Instead, they move through the world with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing they can handle whatever life presents. They pursue their goals with dedication but hold them lightly, understanding that the journey is more important than any particular destination. They love deeply but, without possessiveness, serve others without keeping score, and face challenges without being overwhelmed by them. This is the Machiavelli mindset in its truest form, not the caricature of manipulative scheming that popular culture often presents, but the deeper understanding that real power comes from within and that those who need nothing from the world cannot be controlled by it. It is the recognition that the man who destroys his weak self, the part that clings, grasps, and depends, becomes truly indestructible because there is nothing left for others to threaten or take away. The path to this transformation is available to anyone willing to undertake the work of honest self-examination and gradual strengthening of their inner resources. It requires no special talents, extraordinary circumstances, or external permissions, only the decision to stop seeking from the world what can only be found within yourself. In making this choice, you join the ranks of those rare individuals who have discovered that true freedom lies not in having everything you want, but in wanting nothing you don't have, and in being complete regardless of what circumstances life may bring. The ultimate irony is that in needing nothing, you often find that everything you truly need comes to you naturally, not because you've manipulated or controlled it into existence, but because you've become the kind of person who naturally attracts what serves the highest good. This is the final teaching of the Machiavelli mindset, that in destroying what is weak within us, we don't become diminished but, rather reveal the strength that was always there, waiting to be uncovered beneath the layers of dependency and fear that once seemed so necessary for survival but were actually preventing us from truly living.